with, tonight we're in New York Schools Finance 101. Welcome everyone to the parent training session. The agenda for tonight, we're going to talk about how big is the New York budget for K through 12 education. We'll talk about how does New York the New York education budget compare to other states, where we are. What does it mean to fully fund our schools? Something you may have heard, you'll hear from time to time. And certainly as you meet with legislators and get more involved in advocacy, you will hear that from others. What does it mean that the money belongs to the child? That's another thing that something you'll encounter in advocacy, and something that's out there that districts are possessive of state funding. We'll also talk about how charter funding works. Is more money solution, and how you can influence the New York State education budget. So that's what we'll talk about today. And we'll start again with how big is the New York budget for the K through 12 education. New York State spends $28 billion a year on education. And to put that into perspective, the operating fund, the money that the state pays to operate agencies, for health care, for education, is about $98 billion. So education is nearly one-third of the state budget. And then you can see in the charts here where that money comes from and where it all goes. So education is a large chunk of that, and you'll hear a lot about funding, and I think it's important to know just how much is out there, and that the top revenue source, of course, for the funding is taxes. And how does New York education budget compare to other states? New York State, as you can see, has the highest per pupil spending in the country. So New York spends $23,091 per pupil, and that's at least $4,000, about $4,000 above the next state, which is Connecticut. New York has a very high per pupil spending, and that's important to remember. So that $28 billion gets spread out among all students, and again, this is public school dollars. So these are students in public district schools, public charter schools, and the average funding there is $23,091. What does it mean to fully fund our schools? This is something that's come up. You'll hear it, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the background here. Fully funding our schools is a reference to a lawsuit that was decided in 2006. So it was a lawsuit that started with parents against the state of New York, and the claim was that the children in New York City were not being provided the opportunity to have to receive an adequate education. It was finally decided in 2006. The New York State Court of Appeals ruled in favor of the parents and found that New York State is in violation of a student's constitutional right to a sound basic education. You'll hear that a lot, sound basic education. That's what we're referring to. In the Constitution, it does say does offer that right to students. And so the court found New York State, you're not meeting that requirement for a sound basic education because you are not fully funding the schools. There's not enough money that you're providing to even to allow students in New York City to receive a sound basic education. As a result, New York State was ordered to provide an increase in the basic operating aid. So New York State, because they lost that lawsuit, they were required to provide enough money so that students do have a sound basic education. Advocates statewide argue that the state has never fully met that mandate, and there's still more than $4 billion is still due to students, so that there should be a $4 billion increase in state aid to meet the mandate for the Court of Appeals requirement. You'll hear that referred to as the CFE, C as in cat, F as in Frank, E as in egg, CFE lawsuit because of the group that brought the lawsuit. But fully funding schools, CFE, is a reference to this lawsuit in 2006. It's important to know that some of the things that happen now as in the current governor, so at the time in 2006, George Pataki was governor, now Governor Cuomo is governor. Governor Cuomo says that the mandate has been met and our schools are fully funded. Advocates will point to the fact, like I said, that over the years there have been, I shouldn't have said this, but over the years there have been cuts that have made to education that mean that the $4 billion is still outstanding. They have never met that amount, paid that amount, and then had increases or cuts from there. I'm going to stop for a second and ask, are there any questions? I don't want to run through this. I really want people to, be able to stop me, ask questions, ask me to share more details about what I'm presenting.
Yumiko, one question I have is, if that, the fully funding, if we would get that additional funds, would that also go to charter schools or is just for traditional public schools?
That's a good question. So the funding, and we covered this in the previous webinar, but our training, funding always goes directly to the school district. So right now, the way the state is set up, funding flows from New York State to the school district. Charters then bill at the periodically through the year. They bill the school districts for the number of students they have enrolled. So there is an amount of money that's set in law that says there's a charter, what they call tuition formula, for every child in a charter school. This is the amount of money that the school districts should pass through to the charter schools for their enrollment of the child. It's important to note, I think, that number, that amount, that calculation is less than that $23,000. There's a lot of reasons for that. Some of that is the $23,000 may include things like transportation, which charter schools rely on districts for. So there are some services that are provided to schools. But to answer your question, that money does not go directly to the charters. It goes to the school districts. School districts will build, it does not go, it goes to the school district. Charter schools will build a school district, and based on their enrollment, and school districts are required to pay an amount per student to those charter schools. Okay, so now that leads us a nice little transition into what does the money belong to the child mean? So we just talked about the fact that school districts receive this funding from the state. Throughout the course of the year, periodically, charter schools will bill for the students who are enrolled in charter schools, and the school districts will send payments to charter schools for those students. There has been a great deal of tension between school districts and charter schools because of that mechanism, or the fact that in school districts will say things, or people will say things. You'll hear things like, charter schools are taking money from the district. They take money out of the district. And when they say that, essentially what they mean is that the per pupil funding, like we said, is theirs. That's the assumption. When in fact, right, charter school advocates will say that the money belongs to the child, meaning that that the per pupil funding, that money belongs to the child wherever that child attends. That's state law. It's part of the charter law, which is state law, and so the money does not belong to the district. And so we ask here: do charter schools take money from districts? Only if you think children and the funding that comes with them are district property. And certainly we know and certainly do not believe that that's the case, right? The money belongs to the child. It stays with the child. It's not the school district's money. It's not the state's money. It's not the charter school's money, right? A charter school student who attends a district school, the charter school doesn't get to keep the money, right? Like that money goes to the district. So the money belongs to the child, and that's an important concept, and one that needs to be protected and preserved for school choice and charter schools to continue to operate well, and for students to have the choice of what school they want to go to, and for parents to protect that choice. And again, if you hear that charter schools are taking money, One great way to think about that is like that's only true if you think that children and the funding that come with it are property of the district.
I have a question.
Yes.
It's Helene. Hi. You said a minute ago that the per pupil amount in New York State is about 23,000, and we get in the neighborhood of 13,000, I think it is, or 14,000, and the difference is about 10,000 anyway. So how do you account for that? You mentioned transportation. Is the 23,000, is that supposed to include transportation? Is that, food service? Why do we get so much less than what the per pupil amount is?
Right. And that's, let me just see, I think that is a great question. We're going to talk about that a little on this slide.
Right.
But I'm going to go through it quickly first. And it really, that 23,091 represents, right, the total 28 billion, and if you divide it by the number of students, it really is it's an average. And baked into there are things like transportation, food services, textbooks, and so on and so forth. And many of those things, maybe, or not many of those things, but some of those things are certainly things that are not provided to charter schools. For example, it would include transportation to private schools, which has nothing to do with charters or districts. So that's just a round number that shows the overall number. In order to back out and really get an apples-to-apples comparison, there are many different factors, and some of them are up to rigorous debate about what goes in and what comes out of there. On the whole, right, the charter community has contended and will continue to contend that the funding is not equitable. Charter school students don't get the equivalent funding, and part of that is because of the time frame. So I mentioned that there's a formula for charter tuition, and that formula is actually written in state law. It actually lays out you have to take X amount of dollars from this year, carry the Y, right? And there's an actual formula there. That formula looks at 2 years ago. So wherever the district was 2 years ago, that's part of what goes into the district to the formula for charter. So to the extent that current funding is, there's been an increase over the last 2 years. That's not so for charters necessarily. Charters are playing catch up for districts, or compared to districts. So that's some of the discrepancy as well. Is that helpful?
Yeah,
Yes,
and
it was helpful. Thank you.
I think the message that we want to pass is, as your amiga said, it's an average and it varies by district, it varies by type of school. But if we look as a state, right, the state invests a lot than most of any other state in the country. And so, it changes a little bit of the conversation that we're going to have about like, would just more funds solve the education problems that we have?
Right. And so, like I said, that was a great question. That leads us right to the slide of how does charter funding work in New York? And right, the short answer is it's a complicated formula. But again, it basically says that charters receive what the district spent on education for students 2 years earlier. And they take that number and make some magic and divide it by the total number of students, and you get your per pupil charter tuition for a district. It's important to note, too, that amount changes or varies from district to district. Buffalo is not going to have the same charter tuition as Rochester, not going to have the same tuition as New York City or any other thing, because it's based on each school district's historic spending amounts plus some other factors. So unless every school district were spending the same amount of money, that would be the only time that the charter tuition would be the same. So there's not even truly a way to compare district to district. We are, though, at the association working to change that, to really sort of to be able to drill down as much as you can on what's a fair and good comparison about what goes to district schools and what comes to charter schools, what's the difference for students. So it's 2 years spending divided by number of students. However, some items are removed from the total district spending, like transportation. Transportation. That makes sense because district provides transportation, charter schools, and private schools. Other services, debt service, capital expenditures, the costs for the buildings. And like I said, these things make it difficult to compare apples to apples. And I'll use an example. When a charter school, we'll start in 1998, 2000, when charter schools first came on the scene. A charter school that opened for the first time in 2000 had less, expenses, had fewer expenses than a school district. And part of that reason is, for example, they may not have debt service. They may not have pension liabilities for districts who have that for, the years and decades that they've had staff and retirees and that kind of thing. So there should be some discrepancy between, put it this way, funding could be equitable between charters and districts, and there could be some increase for districts, but it should not be, it likely shouldn't be on the order of magnitude, let's say, for example, of $10,000. So getting at that in terms of the equity is important. The formula for the tuition has been changed or overridden as part of the state's annual budget process every year for the last 10 years. If the original formula, so there's, again, the formula is in state law, but what happens every year is there's a change to the formula, or in the budget process, a decision is made, well, not this year, we're going to, freeze the formula this year, we're going to use a different formula this year. If that had not happened, and if the original formula had been applied since it was established 10 years ago, charter schools would have received millions of dollars of additional funding. And a lot of this, again, is going back to the fully funding. Sort of, there are decisions made that this is the number, this is what students should receive for education, and then what happens as part of the budget process every year or whatever reason, things get changed, and children in the education budget never receives the amount of funding that was originally intended and originally determined as this is what's needed. So that's a constant fight to make sure that schools and students get what they need. The vast majority of funding, of charter funding in your state, is state funding, and that's true for many of the big 5 school districts. So that's true in New York City. I won't say vast majority, but New York City, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Yonkers. Those cities, for those cities, state aid makes up a significant portion of their budget. They can't do school without state aid. So it's a very important piece of the education financing puzzle for schools. Is more money the solution to New York education problems? So I'm going to flip this back, and I'm going to ask people to open up and tell me what you think. What do you think about the idea? What do we need to, right? Is money the answer? How do you feel about that? What do you think about that question? And I'm going to start picking on people. Jason, I see you're here. If you can unmute yourself, what do you think about that question?
Can you repeat the question again?
The question is does money make the difference, basically, right? Is money what we need to fix schools, or is that the problem?
Money makes a huge difference, because with the more money you have, the better resources and better assets for each student. What I notice is the schools that have the best money, that usually have the most money, have the better technology in the school and the better programs to expand the child's education. So money is a huge factor.
All right. Thank you for that. Helene, I'm going to ask you to weigh in.
Yeah, of course, more money can be helpful. You can get more staff. You can get money for facilities, which we don't get now. You can build playground, whatever. So there's always a use for the money, but I don't know that it's the only thing that matters. In fact, to me, really, how we educate our children, the school leader and that person's ability to inspire staff, to inspire children, to collaborate. I mean, those are all important things that don't necessarily have anything to do with money, but yet have a huge impact on education.
Thank you. And Deborah?
I definitely think money plays an important aspect. My thing is so much more on how the money is distributed. I would have rather it be um we receive our own money versus have to go through the school district. Um, it just always seems like we're pulling teeth sometimes. So I think definitely the we making more money. But I would rather the money be given directly to us.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for those. Those are all great points. Um, and so here we have slide 6. Is more money solutions to New York education problems? And what we would say is not necessarily, and it's for all the reasons that you all talked about. You exactly. It's also about how the money is spent, where the money goes, who gets the money, what is it, right? A sound education costs money, right? It's just like you said, Jason. All the stuff costs money, right? And we also want to know how schools spend the money because that's equally important. And so what this graphic, this picture shows is that since 2012, school district support from the state has risen 42%. So there's been a 42% increase in state aid to school districts, right? The high school graduation rates have increased only by 5.4%.
Yeah, and New York State spends more than anyone. So how do you equate those things?
Right, right. And I think again, as parents, this is powerful information to have to really start to peel back the layers of, when folks say, again, particularly charters are stealing money, but it just, where the money's going across the board is important as well. How are our precious dollars, and how is it, how do they come back fairly for our in terms of quality education? And it's also quite important for parents who selected charters for their students, for their children. If there's an argument that the charter schools are stealing money from the districts, there really is begs the question: where does the money go? How does this get spent? And that doesn't have to be an accusation. That doesn't have to be districts where you're spending their money, you're spending it the wrong way. It really can be, for the right people, a way to have a discussion around funding, the way for legislators, for you to talk to legislators about funding. We spend $28 billion. We've had a 42% increase. We have a 5.4% increase in graduation rates, which doesn't seem unbalanced, right? Let's talk about, what are some other solutions out there? And some of the things, talk about what your experience, what your why is. Why is your school valuable to you, right? What are, and one of the things I will tell is that charter schools have a very good graduation rate, right? So is there something that we should be investing in that charters are doing well that could translate to other schools, to schools throughout the state, particularly since we have such disparities in outcomes? All right, 7. How can you influence the New York education budget? So I'm sure you've heard a lot, and you've all, I think everyone here has been, you've been to Albany, you've done the rounds, you've done the advocacy, you've met with members to talk about how funding, what's important and what you need. But we're going to go through this here, that you understand your child deserves the same funding as any other child receiving a public education, no matter what school they attend. That's their right. And that's true whether your child attends a district school or a charter school, or you have one in each, or whatever. Children deserve the same funding. And that was really the basis for that lawsuit. There is something that needs to happen. There's a level of education that's a required minimum. This actually takes a step further and says same funding. Whatever you give for the one child, you should give to the other. And taking that even further, it's really equitable funding. That to meet those child's needs, right, we need to pay attention to what the children need. We need to pay attention to choices that are out there, and we need to give the parents those choices to choose the school. It is their right. And the Big Five, the 5 big districts, again, those are New York City, Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, and Yonkers. The education budget is approved by the city council in New York City or the school board or some equivalent body. And that's important because what that means is that in those cities, parents do not go out to the polling place and vote on the school budget. You don't get to say, yep, I want to pass this budget, I believe in this budget, that's great, or nope, I don't want to pass this budget, I vote no against this budget. That power to vote on the budget rests in those councils, the city council or school board. In all other cities, you can go out and vote on the local education budget. And what's important there is that if you are in one of those cities particularly, it's very important to know, to advocate with these bodies, to attend the school board, meet the school the council representatives, meet with the folks who are actually going to vote on the school budget, because those are the folks who you need to talk to about what's in it, how is it spent. And these are the same groups, the same bodies sometimes who will produce documents and resolutions that say things like charters are, impact school districts, they're hurting our funding, and those kind of things. So developing that relationship with the people who are actually going to make the decision and vote on these on these budgets, and produce or not produce resolutions supporting or condemning charters is important. Now, I don't want to overstate what resolutions do. Resolutions are just basically the opinions of the board, and there have been resolutions in Buffalo and in Syracuse, and maybe charters, but maybe Rochester, that have said just that charter schools are impacting our budgets, and we want a moratorium. We want to stop charter schools. We don't want any more charter schools in our districts. And that kind of policy, when I was working in state government, we call that what they call the camel's nose under the tent. That's the beginning of the attack. You start with pausing, not allowing any more charter schools to be created. Then you start cutting their funding. Then you start you slowly but surely you can dismantle charter schools by enacting these kind of laws. So it's important that if charter schools are important to you, that you reach out to your local elected officials, that you follow this process and get to know the people who are making decisions about your budget. Any questions?
I have a question. I don't know if it's completely relevant, but I always wonder, and I was a member of the Buffalo Board of Education many years ago. I'm not sure that the school districts like Buffalo are right sizing. So there are 9,000 students, 9,000 charter school students approximately in Buffalo. And yet I don't know that Buffalo Public Schools has closed any schools or somehow managed to more effectively use the money that they have. All I keep hearing is that there should be a moratorium and that we're sucking money, the charters are sucking money out of the district. I don't know, it's just a statement. I don't really know what they're doing, but it seems to me if I were in their position and had 9,000 students fewer than I had some years ago, that I would try to do something to right size the district with the number of schools and the staff and so on and so forth.
Right, absolutely. Yes, and that's a problem, I think, too, of just bureaucracy. When I worked in state government, just for a quick background, I worked in a state agency, I worked in the legislature, I worked in the governor's office, and one of the agencies I worked at was the DMV. And someone there said something that I repeat all the time, which is, and the comment was, we add well, we don't subtract well. Right? Governments are very good, agencies are very good about adding things, about, whatever it is, mandates, requirements, processes, programs, but not very good about shedding the ones then that are redundant, are not needed, about right sizing, about all that kind of thing. So I think you're absolutely right. One of the problems is, in my opinion, is that the districts, like many other organizations, grow to a size to achieve to do something, and then when that need no longer exists, they don't, reorganize themselves or restructure themselves to be much more efficient.
And it's not that it's like you said earlier, it's not that the charters are taking money away, it's that parents are making choices and the money follows the child. So why would parents be penalized for making choices that they think are in the best interest of their children? And the district wants a moratorium when they're not doing the things they really should do. And, I don't think they would lose anything by closing some schools and consolidating classrooms because they're, I don't know, they have way too many school buildings as it is. So anyway, just
I
editorial comment.
Yeah,
No, I
no,
think it's one of the most difficult questions in education. And my first job in education was closing schools in Boston, and it was extremely hard because it's a very difficult and an emotional problem for communities. But what I think I've seen both in Boston, both in here, is when then, as you said, like parents are making choices, to go to charters or other schools. And sometimes the schools really just don't have enough students anymore to maintain the budget, right? To sustain that budget. And then I think it's a little easier to have that conversation. Even like Mayor de Blasio, who is very against, charters and very against, I believe, closing schools, had to close a few schools in New York City. I believe it was last year or maybe 2 years ago, because those schools just barely had any students there. People just had left. And then I think it becomes like kind of self-evident that the community does not want that school.
thank you. Any other questions or comments before I go on to the next slide? Jason or Deborah?
No questions.
All right.
Can I
Same
just say
here.
one more thing? Especially Helene is here also, and I know she's also the board chair. For charter schools, every charter school has to approve the budget in their school board, and you as a parent can attend that board meeting and see the discussion that the board has around that budget. And I think it's at least my experience in my board, like we really think about and had to make some difficult choices last year preparing for budget cuts in due to COVID. But this is one way that charter parents can influence the budget of their particular charter school.
Mhm.
That's a great point. Thank you for adding that. Show up everywhere where there's a budget being discussed about your kids. Absolutely. And so what can you do? So you can advocate, right, for fair funding and education policies that support charter school children, right? And I'm going to say that again, advocate for fair funding and education policies that support charter school children. And we say that because a lot of people are out there advocating for education. We fully support the advocates who say, we want to support schools, we want to support all schools, we want to support education for all children. What's happening is the voice of charter parents, the voice of people who choose charter schools for their kids has been drowned out, as you know, has been marginalized. And what we're saying is what we hope that will happen as a result of these trainings, that a lot more parents will feel empowered and they will be out there to advocate for fair funding and education policies. And here's what we recommend and what we're going to help folks with is to engage with your electeds, right? Engage with elected officials. File and be aware and cognizant of this schedule for the state legislature. In January, the governor will propose his budget. There's actually state law says, it's actually state constitution says, dictates the date by which the budget has to be proposed by the governor for the legislature. So in January, we look for that budget to come out. That budget sets the stage for what are these numbers going to be, right? Is it going to be $28 billion? Is it going to be 27? Is it going to be a cut? Will it be a raise? All of that. In the budget, there are dollars as well as policies, right? So this is the time too when you look in that document, or when you look at what's included in there. That's where the formula is. Did they change the charter formula? Did they cut it? Are they saying this year we're going to ignore it and we're going to do something else? All of those things are in there. Major policy changes. If there were a major policy change to the charter law, if there were a major policy change that impacted the funding to education in general. It's also important to say that while you're advocating for schools and education, you have your moment and your time to talk to elected officials. Please also, consider what else you need while you're there. I think that's an absolute legitimate ask and use of your precious time. The budget doesn't just impact education; it impacts housing, healthcare, economic development, environment, all of those things. And we are happy to answer questions about that for you, to provide information to you to the extent that that's important, so that you are empowered to advocate. So that happens in January. The governor proposes a budget. In February, the Senate and Assembly will hold hearings. One, they ask that the public, you're right, generally come and tell them about what they think about the budget. That's the time when the association will provide testimony. We will say, here's what we think about the budget, here's what we like in it, here's what we don't like, or if that's necessary, or here's what we want to see added to the budget. And then what will happen after that, the Senate and the Assembly each will develop their own proposals. They'll say, okay, we've seen the budget, here's what we think we want to add to the governor's budget or take away from the budget, here's what we would propose for our budget. And in March, all sides negotiate. So Senate, Assembly, and the governor's office, right, the old separation of powers there, right, legislature and executive branch, they negotiate the budget. And then they have until April 1st is the deadline for the budget. So the state constitution says that we'll have a new budget by April 1st. In some years, many years, that deadline has not been met, and we've had the so-called late budget. And most of the recent years it's been on time. So those are the dates. The reason I'm going through those dates is because I want you to know the cycle, understand the cycle, and what we're going to do is try to plan for activities around that cycle. When January comes out, we want to tell you what's in the budget, right? When February comes out, we want to tell you when the hearings are. If you want to testify, we want to see if we can help you testify, get on the budget and help you with or get on the ballots the list, and help you get testimony. If when March in their negotiation, that's the time to sort of keep up with the members, keep up with what's going on, find out while they're negotiating what the status is. We'll try to help you with that too and tell you what things are happening now, what the movement is, and it's that time to keep up the pressure and say, hey, I'm still here, right? This is still important to me. While you're negotiating, when you go back to that table, remember my children, my child, right, my voice and my choices. And when you're doing that, we talked about this early in one of the sessions, right, what's your why? What's your why? Remember what your why is. I want this changed in the budget. I want this included in the budget. I'm here for my children. This is important to me. And remember, if you are not if you're not at the table, you are on the menu. Your choice, your voice. We recommend that you use it. So that was the core of the Financing 101. What we have here is the list of all of the sessions for the advocacy. These sessions all together, we believe, constitute right. You're ready, trained to go out there and really dig in advocacy, so that it's you can go the course for through session. You can stay with them like budget. You can talk to folks. I know what's in it. Here's what's in it. Here's what I like. Here's what I don't like. Here's what we should support and do more of. Right? When the testimony's there, you know and you're prepared to be able to talk to people, or when the hearings happen, talk to people, and also keep and watch. Some of that is just watching to see what happens, so you can hear what other people are saying about the education budget and what other people are saying about the charter students in education and other areas too, because as much as we say, right, that we support charter schools and the choice to choose a charter school, there are advocates out there who are saying the opposite, who are saying we do not support charter schools and we would like you to shut them down and to stop this and quote unquote give the money back to the district, that kind of thing. So it's important to hear what they're saying, know who they are as well. And like I said, and then in March, stay with it and advocate. And then we hope to have some kind of a lobby day, which is a large activity that involves, mass advocacy and sort of flooding Albany and flooding members with we're here, here's what we want. Because after the budget, there'll be bills, and so there's legislation that we deal with too. So the Advocacy Boot Camp is designed to give you that nice review of the advocacy, of how charters work, finance, performance, and importantly, the charter myths and facts. This is the schedule. We hope that you'll register for future, the next sessions in the training. I'm going to stop for a second and hope that somebody comments, questions, suggestions, concerns before we move on.
Yeah. I know that, we'll advocate for more operating funding, the per pupil funding. I'm also wondering what's happening, if anything, with advocating for facilities funding, or advocating even for something that, since COVID has become very glaring for many of the charter schools. We depend on our district for transportation. If they don't provide the transportation, and Buffalo Public Schools has been all remote, so they haven't been providing bus transportation for themselves, how can we get reimbursed independently for something like that, so that we're not so dependent on the district school?
Great questions. But I wanted to ask, you must have been on my previous webinar where we talk about those same things quite directly. The idea of funding coming directly to charter schools, Deborah, thank you too. You raised that earlier. That's something for the charter community to consider, and it's something that we are considering in terms for legislation for next year. Proposing a bill and or supporting a bill that's already out there that would say the money comes directly to the charter schools. My caution, and the reason why I'm not saying yes, absolutely we're doing that, is what we need to do is we need to review what's in that bill and what the process is right now, so that we don't end up with something that's unwieldy for charters, right? As you know, school districts are built for all of the interactions with SED and the programs and the information that has to go back and forth. A small charter school may not be able to do that. So we'd have to make sure that, if something like that happens, for example, right, it can't be June. We need the schools to build systems or somebody to take over that, process for schools. But yes, I think that ultimately that's a very common sense idea and initiative because it removes from the school districts the inclination, the temptation to declare this money there, right? It was never part of your budget. It was never part of your funding stream. This is not your money. They could still say, well, if it weren't for charters, we'd get that money. But I think that, that having to, quote, unquote, write that check is someplace where they can see every time they have to send money, it's a reminder that that's money that could be in their coffers. And so I do support direct funding to districts, or to charter schools, but I want to make sure what that means. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that particularly in New York City, but I would guess in some other places as well, there is the problem of scale, right? That because the district has contracts for transportation, it is probably much cheaper for charters to get transportation through the district. So there are every single issue like that. There is pros and cons, and we need to see, what would be the upside, but also what would be the downside, because then you are solely responsible for transportation and you don't have the buying power of the district.
Yeah. I do want to add, though, and I want to make sure that you're aware, in Buffalo, just like actually any school district in New York State, if the district is providing that service to other schools, other schools that are not district schools, they have to provide it for charter schools, even if they're not in session. So they could be remote, but if they are providing busing for, let's say, a Catholic school or a private school, they have to do that for charter schools as well. Yeah. So, and they're being
Rochester's RCSD has been remote this entire time, and all the charters have who've either done hybrid or just full in person have had transportation. It takes a little muscle work, but you got to put pressure on them. It's their obligation.
And New York State New York State Education Department has a memo that's just as recent as September reminding school districts of that obligation.
So I have a question. Even with the money coming, funneling through the school district, I think it wouldn't be a problem if there was someone who worked at the school district that was like a connector from between the charter school and the school district. And I bring that up in particular because that was my goal for running for school board. And oh Lord, I done hurt so many people's feelings because they felt like, how dare she run for school board? She doesn't even have a child in the school district. And I'm like, well, clearly we live in a school district. I pay taxes here for the school district, so I can run. But I think it needs to be a middleman. So even if the money stay there, I wouldn't have a problem with the money staying there because obviously the overhead, you know, like the prices of things that maybe the charter school can't afford, or maybe there's a partnership with like the transportation services. They may get a better deal if you have 10 schools that you're going to versus, you know, like 5 or something like that. But it definitely should be a middleman. In particular, like my children had to stay home Monday, and I got a call at 8 p.m. that Troy Prep wasn't going to be able to open because there wasn't no busing. And I didn't find that to be fair because now I have to call my employer and let them know, like, hey, I can't come in. Calling them early in the morning to let them know. And I understand it wasn't the school's fault, and they end up figuring out and letting the elementary schools kids come in because it was like a 50-50 where the parents bring them and then the school bus brought the others. But my middle school kid, he had to stay home because 80% of those children take the school bus. So it's those little things like that. Like I personally put on a post up, and I had a bunch of people sharing it. Like, we need bus drivers because they're saying that there's not enough bus drivers because of COVID. We need people to, to apply for these jobs. And a lady actually shared some information from the school bus company. It was like, hey, this is the information you need to apply. So I reshared that. So I guess my biggest thing is that even if we keep the money there, like we need to have a middle person. We need to have somebody who is neutral, who can play, both roles, that understands where the charter school is coming from, but then also understand how, the district or where they're coming from. I think that'd be very beneficial, especially in the city where I'm at, because it's not that many charter schools here, so they can kind of play nice if they wanted to.
Right, and that's the kind of thing, too, that in terms of advocacy, when I say fair policies, it's that kind of thing. Under no circumstance should a school district be in a position, unless it's a true unforeseeable emergency where they're not, getting kids to school, right? And take away the fact that it's a charter school or whatever, right? Like a district student who and school, public school too, let's just, make up a school name, right, shouldn't be wondering whether or not the bus is coming. That's an absolute fundamental requirement of the district. And the extent that they can't do that, right, something needs to happen in terms of examination of how they're providing their service. The same way that the school shouldn't just close tomorrow, again, based on some unforeseen circumstances. And that's a responsibility and a right, it's a responsibility of the district and a right for the students that applies, period. Right? There should not be it's a charter school, so they'll just have to figure it out. Absolutely not. Every child is entitled. Remember, constitutional right, sound basic education. Right? And in this case, if you're not bringing a child there that you had had every expectation to get to be brought to school, that's a problem. And the school district's not living up to its responsibility. And I'll read that large, like the public, we are not living up to our responsibility for students. Right, and we should call that into question and figure out how to do that and resolve that. And that's what I mean by fair policies. And that's something that when you're talking to an elected official, that would be one of the first things I brought up every conversation. Remember what I said, right? Because that shouldn't happen. Right? Everyone should be at the bus company, at the school district, trying to move heaven and earth, trying to figure out how to get those kids to school, and making sure that they're reaching out and people are aware and notifying parents in a timely way.
So we know Deborah is in Troy, Jason and Helen are in Buffalo. Marcella, where are you? Where are you located in the state? If you want to share, and which school your child attends.
Muted. Yeah.
Okay, if you want to share later, we always do introductions.
And Marcel, I just want to let you know that we have in the chat there We dropped in the chat a link to register for the advocacy boot camp. If you click that link, you'll see where the training sessions are, when the training sessions will be. We do hope you register. And I'm going to ask for some feedback, on-the-spot feedback from Deborah, Helene, and Jason to see, are these helpful? Do you see yourselves being prepared to be advocates, particularly Deborah and Jason, next year? Are these fruitful trainings, because we intend to do this as a regular cycle throughout the, going forward. So love to hear some feedback.
I'm gonna just go real fast because I have to jump off and go on another call. But I definitely I enjoyed these because, like I said, I literally just was going off that's my kid. I need to protect him, like mommy be a mold, and want to make sure that he, they're good. So this information, it kind of helped align up certain things to make sure that I'm able to say the right things, and you don't want to offend people and things like that. I'm actually working I'm on a board at a after-school program here in Troy, and 90% of the children that attend are Troy Prep kids. So I was on a board meeting last night, and so I'm trying to work with her to see if they'll be willing to have some of the parents sign up for the January classes, because she's also going through the same process where she needs parents to go out and speak to these legislators, because she's like in a deficit right now because all of the after school funding is on hold. So I told her the same thing, like, you need to get them the right letters. I said, so maybe they need to take, especially the parents that are charter school parents, maybe they need to join this, and, we could kind of figure out some kind of combination where we can kill, one bird with, two birds with one stone type thing. I said, because she's ultimately holding those kids that are going to school maybe 2 times a week. She has them there from 7:30 to 6:30. So the charter school and the parents, she's playing the middleman. So she usually calls me and asks me like, hey, do you know what's going on with the school? And I'm filling her in. So we're trying to figure out some dates. It's crazy because when you asked that question, she was inboxing me, asking me like, hey, are you still thinking about sending me that email? Because I totally forgot. But I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, and that's a perfect opportunity, again, for advocacy, that again, talking about policies, that you also want and need. Like, listen, when these schools shut down, we rely on after-school programs. So that's as important to me as well. We need this all to fit together. So support that funding. That's a 100% what you should be doing and part of the process. So I hope those parents join. I hope you're successful, and thank you for sharing that.
I'll just say I appreciate your leadership in providing these sessions. I think I knew some of what you're talking about, but it's been a long time. So it's good to get some additional facts and some confirmation. And it's also I think very useful to do this as a collaboration or collective, if you will, rather than individual schools. And I always like to, instead of just asking for more money, I always like to sort of know what exactly we want to do with the money, or what some specific things that we may be asking for. So that's why I was asking about facility fundings before. I happen to be a founder of the charter school I'm representing today. And when we had to open our school, we had no money. We didn't have a checking account. There was no money for anything. And so that was a big challenge. So, if you want to buy a building, you want to lease a building, you want to expand a building, those are things that district schools get reimbursed for at some percentage. But, I'm be very happy to advocate, to know what we might advocate for that would benefit charters across the state. And that may be one of them anyway.
Yes, and stay tuned, because we may see that next year, some of the things that we propose as legislation, because we know that is a pain point for charters. Upstate do not get the facility funding. In New York City they do, but upstate the cost is borne all completely by the charter schools. Yeah.
Thank you.
And for things like, improvements, air purification systems, for example, might be something that charter schools want to purchase. So capital funding is critically important.
Right.
Jason Marcello, we have 3 minutes left, and before we wrap up, I want to make sure I give you a chance to say anything before we go.
Okay. I know for me, every workshop and every meeting that you guys have set up for me has been highly educational. When I speak to the other parents who go to my son's school, I kind of pass everything that I learned from you, Yamika, in terms of the budget and stuff like that. One of the best parts was when we had the conference and we started to do the role playing and stuff like that. That was fun. That was fun getting ready to talk to a politician and stuff like that. I know that it's just going to take time and repetition and more practice for people to get comfortable talking to politicians because they see them in people of power and they may feel intimidated. But they also have to understand that it's the parents who have the power and it's the children who have the power and they work for us. So.
Right, that's right. We will try to get an elected official here to see if you can do some real-time role playing. So you can actually interact with them in one of the classes or in one of the parent sessions. So stay tuned. No guarantee to do that. I will find someone who will do that.
Yeah, we're gonna have that same role play again on December 22nd. We have another session of the advance, and we're gonna do that again, Jason. If you wanna practice, I wanna leave everybody with two things. So I think most of you have already registered and told us like who are your representatives. Marcella, I don't think we have yours. If you can please go to that form to register, because then we know who are your representatives and we can help connect you with them. We can give you research, which issues they're interested. And if we have meetings with them, we can also invite you to join, as Helen said, like as a group of charter advocates. And one more thing, please help us recruit more parents for these meetings. So any kind of work that you can do to bring more people to these meetings, there's a lot of power in numbers. And so please help us bring more parents.
Can I just say, I think it'd be really helpful if we could get another flyer that had the correct login information for the Zoom meeting, because what we got was not correct. And I had distributed, we put it on our Facebook page. I had distributed to board members. And anyway, it would be helpful if we had some way to get that out.
Yes, sure. Janique, I believe you have Helene's contact, right? But if not, I can also share.
Yes, I'll send it to you, Helene.
Okay, well, I'm talking about in flyer form. If
Yes, I have the flyer. I'll send it to you.
Yeah,
Okay.
we have it. Yeah.
And Helene, we're gonna have another email that'll go out to you. And the link that you're using right now is the link for everything. Training sessions, council calls. So you can even bookmark this link going forward if it's helpful.
Thank you. That'll help.
And the splash pad is close by too. What's the?
All right. Well, thank you very much. It's been a great class, and we'll see you next time.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Good, everybody.
Good night.